Thank you very much. First of all, I want you to know that America has had a treasure from Louisiana, and that's Paul Pastrick. What Paul didn't tell you is our first CCSSO meeting, and if you're into the educational acronyms, that is the Council for Chief State School Officers. I went to my first one in March of 2009. I immediately knew I didn't fit in, and this guy sits down next to me and has about a 20-minute conversation, and from there, between Paul Pastrick and Eric Smith, I have two mentors. Eric is the former commissioner of Florida, worked with Governor Bush, and Paul, I have two mentors that I turn to frequently. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that if the day and when the day comes that I'm finished as a state superintendent in Indiana, if anyone ever looks at me and compares me to Paul Pastrick, I'll know I've been successful. Paul, thank you very much. Steve, I want to know who in the hell thought it was a good idea that I follow Howard Fuller. Yeah, I mean, that's just not very good. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about life during and after comprehensive education reform. I am alive. We are talking about it, and you will live too. So I'm going to start with this. Those legislators who stood up earlier, I want you to stand up again, because you got a tough job ahead of you. Stand up, come on. Stand up. Now what I got to say, all these people are clapping for you. Get off your butts and get to work. You got a tough job ahead of you. Senator Pell talked about a Greek philosopher. I want to talk a little bit about a young man I met in 2009. I'd been in office 3 months. With me today is my former chief of staff, really just about like a brother to me, my very best friend and the guy who was the architect of Indiana's education reform package, Todd Houston. And like I said, I wouldn't be here today without Todd. But Todd had a good idea that I go speak to the future business leaders of America. Little high school organization, future entrepreneurs. So I went and gave them the rah-rah speech, you know, hey, you're global competition. You got to get out there. You got to bust your butts. Kids from other countries are going to take your seats in universities. I was just hammering that message home. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. So I just, went home, kind of figured, well, that was over, got that one over, speech number 21, stuff it in the file. 9 months later, I get another invitation from the future business leaders of America to come back in 2010 and address them again. So it was a Saturday morning, 7 o'clock. Again, my friend Todd Houston does it to me again. Now, what I haven't said to this point is I had spent the night before in Gary, Indiana. And spending a night in Gary, Indiana is like spending a week. Okay, so I'd gotten home about 2 o'clock in the morning. Got to go in for my 7 o'clock rah-rah speech. Walk in a place not quite this big, not quite this crowded, and this little fellow walks up to me, and he says, Dr. Bennett, do you remember me? I wanted to say, hey, pal, look, I've had about 3 hours sleep. I didn't put my contacts in. I can't even see you. Okay? And he sticks his hand out very confidently, and he says, my name is William Zhao, and I'm president of Future Business Leaders of America. And he says, Dr. Bennett, can I give you a gift? Now, we've been around about 15 months at this point, right? And I wanted to ask young William, are your mom, dad teachers? Does it tick? Did your mom bake me cookies? Do I need to have the staffer taste test them? And he takes me over to his chair, and he gets in his briefcase, and he pulls out a shiny red book. And the shiny red book is entitled this, Fierce Urgency, Education and Future Global Competition Through the Eyes of a Young Chinese Immigrant, and the author is William Zhao. And inscribed in the front cover of the book says, "To Dr. Bennett, you inspired me to write this book." It sits on my nightstand. It is probably one of the most prized possessions I have since I took this office, because William so eloquently tells us the plight of American education, and specifically in my world, Indiana education. And William says this, and I think it's on about page 15. He says, you know, education is a big old chess game. And he said, I spent the first 10 years of my life in Anshan, China, 2 years in Vancouver, and the rest of the time in Kokomo, Indiana. And he says, this I know. My native country is playing chess to win, and we are playing chess not to lose. And if we don't start playing chess to win, they're going to take us over. That's a 17-year-old kid. 17-year-old kid. So why do I tell you that story? I'm going to ask you, what is fierce urgency here in Louisiana? What does fierce urgency look like to you? And you better answer that question. Because as Governor Bush mentioned, as Paul mentioned, in a United States where I get up every morning and I have in my office a scoreboard keeping score of how we're doing, and I have our vision statement going on in that scoreboard out in the atrium of the State House every day, and I have measurements that I am measuring our progress by in this country, I intend to beat your butts. I'm a coach. I keep score. And my deal is, if I finish ahead of you, our kids get the seats in the universities. Our kids get the jobs. As Governor Bush alluded, your job is to beat my butt. And then after you beat my butt, I want to beat your butt. Guess who wins? Our kids. Our kids. That's fierce urgency. That's fierce urgency. So in Indiana, very quickly, I will tell you, fierce urgency sounds like this. The educational attainment and career preparation of all Indiana students will be the best in the United States and on par with the most competitive countries around the world. That is on our scoreboard every day for all the world to see. And then we have 3 goals. 90% of our state's children will pass our state standardized test. 25% of our children will leave high school with advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or dual credit before they graduate. And 90% of our children will leave high school with a meaningful high school diploma, which means they don't need to be remediated. And every day on my scoreboard, and by the way, it has the days, hours, minutes, and seconds of my term clicking down. There are a hell of a lot of people can't wait till that gets 0, okay? The belief that we only have today about 300 and what, Todd, 30 days left? That's fierce urgency. That's fierce urgency. Because, you know, we talk, and Governor Bush said this, and, you know, I'm a huge Governor Bush fan. He says it's going to take 10 years. That's crap, folks. Our kids don't have 10 years. Paul, what was the number you mentioned? 233,000? I'm going to ask you something. Put a face and a name with 233,000 kids. How many times they get to go through 5th grade? How many times they get to go through 6th grade? They got one chance. We're sitting in here talking about 10 years. That's crap, folks. We have to do it now. We must do it now. That's fierce urgency. That's what William Zhao talks about. So in Indiana, we said, let's change the system. Let's change the system of education. We can talk about having more charter schools. We can talk about vouchers. We can talk about teacher principal effectiveness. We can talk about an accountability system. And if you do one of those things at a time, and you legislators, and you get up and pat yourself on the back and say, boy, it was a tough session, we got to give ourselves a break next year, kids lose. So we fixed the system in 1 year. We fixed the system in 1 year, and we did it by drastically changing every structure in education. Every structure. And we did it this way. And I know Howard's not a free market. He says he doesn't see the voucher system from a free market approach. Frankly, in my heart, neither do I. It's a social justice issue. Tony and Tina Bennett make pretty good money. Okay, we have a set of 26-year-old triplets. We have a single child, a bonus baby, 4 years later. It's a good word for that, isn't it? We could afford to send our kids anywhere we wanted. You know what? When I moved from one place to another, I went out and rode around all the districts and said, which place do I want to live in? A lot of those 233,000 kids, they have parents who can't afford to do that. I'm going to ask you superintendents. We're going to do the napkin test. If I took a napkin back to your tables and asked you to write down the worst school districts in the state of Louisiana, I'll bet a $100 bill that if there are 15 of you in the room, there will be no more than 2 districts. You all know who they are. And I'm going to ask you, would you send your kids to those schools? If the answer to that's no, you owe it to the children in our communities to give them another choice. So we said this: the system will be fixed with competition. Public school to public school competition. In Indiana, you can ride down a highway, and I noticed this when Todd and I drove in from the airport. We saw billboards, what, Todd? Charter schools. We saw the Catholic schools have billboards. Go through the Indiana landscape, and we have public schools with billboards in other public school districts. And you know what? Some of them drive buses into the other districts and pick up kids. There's public school to public school choice. Children are not trapped by their geography.